Picture your starving cattle pacing restlessly along a fence line, while a woman posing as a security officer obstructs your ranch entrance. Imagine her smirking as she compels a 73-year-old man to trudge through deep mud simply to get feed to his livestock. This was the precise situation Ezra Hendress endured because of Brenda Kowalski. This self-styled HOA patroller would use her raised F-250 to barricade the way into his family's ranch without fail each morning. Clipboard in hand and her counterfeit badge shining, she carried on as if she held the deed to land that had been in his family's possession since 1952. She would remain there for hours, her air conditioning blasting, observing the elderly rancher grapple with the challenge of tending to animals that were quite literally being starved by her abusive power. However, there was something Brenda was unaware of. Ezra had dedicated 40 years to repositioning derailed freight trains that weighed 200 tons. Moreover, he possessed logging chains, a winch on his tractor, and the profound patience of a man who had reached his limit. What would your response be if a bully with a phony badge were starving your livestock? Let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from, and recount your most dreadful HOA ordeal. Ezra Hendress was the inheritor of Thunder Creek Ranch from his father, a veteran of the Korean War who had purchased the 40 acres using his GI Bill benefits in 1952. The property is located in what was once the very definition of remote Texas rolling prairie, a place where the primary form of entertainment was observing thunderstorms advancing across the skyline. This was the state of affairs before the Willowbrook subdivision emerged around them, seemingly overnight like mushrooms following a 3-day downpour. If you step onto Ezra's land on a summer morning, you will be met with the aroma of 3 generations of hard, honest labor. Cracked leather saddles suspended in the barn, the sweet scent of hay dust dancing in the beams of sunlight, and the crisp, metallic essence of well water drawn from 300 feet below. The wooden fence posts retain the smell of creosote from their initial installation by his father, and each plank bears the history of storms overcome and seasons endured. This was the place where he brought up 2 children following the passing of his wife, Martha. He financed both of their college educations with money from his cattle operation and currently cares for 30 head of Angus with assistance from his granddaughter, Sage, at 22. She is incredibly sharp, pursuing a pre-law degree at UT Austin and dedicating her summers to the lesson that the most valuable legal training begins with grasping how ordinary people tackle real-world challenges. 5 years prior, real estate developers transformed the surrounding prairie into a landscape of uniform houses bearing pretentious names such as Tuscany Estates and Heritage Oaks. As it seems, every Texas suburb must evoke the feeling of Italian wine country. The new homeowners established the Willowbrook HOA with remarkable speed and chose Brenda Kowalski as their self-appointed community enforcement coordinator. Brenda, a 45-year-old divorced real estate agent, had relocated from Ohio. After the dissolution of her marriage, she commands a lifted F-250 with personalized license plates that read Hari UL8R and comports herself as if she wields genuine authority. Rather than just a laminated badge she produced at the neighborhood FedEx store, the diesel engine of her truck roars like an enraged chainsaw, and she revs it purely for the noise it creates whenever she parks. The bitter smell of her exhaust blends with the sweet fragrance of the prairie grass, a seemingly intentional affront to all things natural. This is the point where Brenda's actions become both cunning and perilous. She begins parking her truck in front of Ezra's gate every morning precisely at 7, asserting that his unsightly ranch operations are in violation of HOA regulations. She captures photographs, issues citations on official-looking documents, and makes threats of legal repercussions. Her experience in real estate taught her that the majority of elderly landowners lack the financial means to contest legal disputes. Even those that are entirely baseless, it is a methodical approach. Bully them into submission or financial ruin. Yet here is the detail that will surely make you furious. Ezra's land was never incorporated into the HOA. His property predates the subdivision by a full 70 years, with deed records dating back to Eisenhower's presidency. Brenda is banking on him being too elderly, too impoverished, or too cowed to challenge her in a court of law. When Ezra calmly clarifies that he never consented to any HOA covenants, Brenda simply scoffs. "We'll see about that, old man," she retorts, adjusting her fake badge. "This neighborhood has standards now, and you're going to abide by them, like it or not. I have connections at City Hall who have a better grasp of property law than some old rancher." The sound of her truck door slamming reverberates across the field like a gunshot, startling his cattle and making them dash towards the far fence. But Ezra merely stands, observing her departure, and recalls a piece of advice from his former railroad supervisor. The most catastrophic derailments occur when someone disregards the warning signals. What Brenda fails to grasp is that she has just initiated a conflict with a man who has spent 4 decades resolving issues with physics, leverage, and the meticulous planning required to keep freight trains on schedule. Ezra has also come to understand that in property disagreements, solid documentation invariably trumps intimidation, a principle that will prove invaluable in the weeks ahead. That evening, standing in his kitchen, surrounded by the familiar groans of the house settling, Ezra observes the cattle that have fed on this very grass for 3 generations. If Brenda is intent on playing games with feigned authority, he is poised to show her the consequences of underestimating a man who has guided derailed locomotives back onto their tracks. Monday morning, 7 a.m. on the dot, Brenda has returned. This time, however, she is doing more than just obstructing the gate. She has come equipped with folding chairs and a cooler, effectively transforming Ezra's property boundary into her own private tailgating event. She establishes her position as if she is seizing territory, her diesel engine idles for a full 20 minutes, its sole purpose seemingly to blanket his pasture with black smoke before she finally turns it off. The consequences are felt right away. Ezra is unable to drive his feed truck to the rear pasture to reach his pregnant heifers. These animals, accustomed to a strict feeding routine for years, are now congregating near the gate, bewildered and hungry. Their lowing sounds drift through the morning air, a collective chorus of protest. Sage is forced to leave her old Honda a quarter of a mile down the county road and trek through knee-high grass just to assist with the morning chores. The prairie vegetation, still damp with dew, saturates her jeans, and she reaches the barn looking as though she has waded through a verdant lake. "This is crazy, Grandpa," she exclaims, picking burrs from her socks. She can't just set up camp on our property line like some suburban dictator. But Brenda is growing more audacious. She gives Ezra a cheerful wave as he nears the fence, as if they were long-lost friends engaged in a pleasant chat. "Morning, Mr. Hendricks. Just making a record of some concerns regarding agricultural smells that are impacting property values. You know, community standards and all." The thing that truly irritates Ezra is her reference to agricultural odors, as though she were describing a hazardous waste site, when in fact what she is smelling is honest soil, hay, and livestock, the very scents that have defined a significant part of Texas. Then, a small development occurs that alters the entire situation. Sage finds out that Brenda has been lodging police reports, alleging that Ezra threatened her when he requested she move her truck. These are actual police reports, complete with case numbers. Deputy Martinez, an acquaintance of Ezra's since their high school days, takes him aside at the feed store to give him a warning that sends a chill down his spine. "Ezra, I don't like being the one to tell you this, but she's creating a paper trail," Martinez says, his tone hushed and grave. 3 distinct incident reports alleging harassment and verbal threats. "I'm sure it's nonsense, but if this ends up in court, she'll have the documentation, and it will be your word against hers." That evening, seated at his kitchen table with the comforting aroma of Martha's old coffee percolator filling the room, Ezra embarks on his own documentation effort. He takes pictures of every event, notes the timestamps, and meticulously records Brenda's words and actions. His time on the railroad taught him that the line between a minor holdup and a major catastrophe often hinges on maintaining precise records. Sage sets up her laptop and begins to investigate property law on the county courthouse's website. The archives of the old building trace back to the territorial era, and she unearths something noteworthy. Property owners in Texas have the right to ask for a survey verification from the county to legally define their boundaries. While it comes with a cost of about $300, it generates official legal proof that is recognized in court, the type of irrefutable evidence that can put an end to property disagreements before they even begin. We have to start thinking like lawyers, not just ranchers. Sage advises her grandfather, displaying deed records that delineate their property lines with the accuracy of a surveyor. Brenda is playing a legal game, so we must defeat her at it. However, Brenda is not done escalating the situation. She enlists 2 other HOA board members to participate in her enforcement activities. Suddenly, the harassment has a chorus. Now, 3 trucks are positioned at various points along Ezra's fence line, their drivers behaving as though they are on official business rather than conducting an organized campaign of intimidation. The community is beginning to take sides, and the atmosphere is becoming hostile. Some residents of the subdivision back Brenda, having moved to the suburbs to get away from precisely this type of rural environment. They prefer manicured lawns to cattle pastures. Others believe she has gone too far but are hesitant to voice their opinions, fearing she will target them with HOA violation notices for minor infractions like mailbox height or lawn care. Ezra's neighbor, Mrs. Olivia, an elderly Vietnamese woman renowned for growing the county's finest tomatoes, comes by with a basket of fresh produce and a piece of wisdom that strikes at the core of the issue. "In my homeland we had a proverb," she says to him, her accent pronounced but her message perfectly clear. "The duck that quacks the loudest is the first to be shot." That woman is a very loud duck. That night, standing in his barn and running his weathered hands over the chains that had once hauled derailed freight cars back onto the rails, Ezra comes to a decision. If Brenda wishes to play games of documentation, he will provide her with more documentation than she ever anticipated. But unlike her fabricated authority and baseless complaints, his proof will be authentic, precise, and utterly devastating when the moment comes to present it. The scent of old leather and motor oil fills his lungs as he inspects the winch system on his tractor. Just a routine check, of course, yet, deep inside, he is beginning to formulate a plan for a showdown that will demand more than just paperwork to settle. By Thursday, Brenda had perfected harassment into a fine art. She had enlisted 2 additional HOA board members. Dale Hutchkins, a retired insurance adjuster with an excess of free time, and Karen Fitzgerald, a real estate agent who envisioned profit every time she glanced at undeveloped property. Now, a trio of trucks created a mobile blockade around Ezra's land, communicating via a WhatsApp group they dubbed Ranch Patrol. As if they were some kind of suburban defense force, the psychological campaign rapidly grew more complex. They would appear at unpredictable hours. Early in the morning as Ezra was attempting to feed his cattle, at midday when his hay delivery arrived, and late in the evening as he was herding his animals in. It became impossible to know when his gate would be obstructed, transforming every routine ranch chore into a tactical military maneuver. The effect on his business was like a freight train slowly derailing. Ezra's hay provider, a crusty old-timer named Buck Williams, grew weary of parking on the county road and carrying bales over a quarter-mile of open prairie. "I'm sorry, Ezra, but my business can't operate on some crazy woman's whims," Buck stated, his weathered expression both apologetic and resolute. "Give me a call when this is all sorted out." Sarah Olivia, the large animal veterinarian who had cared for Ezra's cattle for 15 years, encountered the same obstacle during an emergency. One of his pregnant heifers was in distress, but the vet had to leave her truck, filled with medical supplies, and sprint across the pasture with whatever she could carry. The lost minutes were critical, and although the calf was saved, Olivia later took Ezra aside, her face etched with worry. "This harassment is impacting the health of your animals," she stated plainly. "Cattle under stress don't reproduce well, they don't gain weight as they should, and they don't produce milk. If this keeps up, you're facing significant financial losses." It was then that Sage unearthed a piece of information that completely altered the situation. While looking into HOA rules online, she found Brenda's real estate ads from her past life in Ohio. These were not typical property listings. They were promotional materials in which Brenda assured prospective buyers that the Thunder Creek Ranch was a temporary agricultural use area slated for development into a premium retail center within 2 years. "Grandpa, you have to see this," Sage said, the light from her laptop illuminating the kitchen. "She's been selling homes by promising people that your ranch will disappear. She is literally leveraging our land as a feature to command higher home prices." The falsehoods grew more intricate with each passing day. Brenda began telling new residents of the subdivision that the ranch was a source of diseases that could harm their children, that his cattle were poisoning the groundwater, and that his unlicensed agricultural activities were in violation of county health regulations. She wasn't merely harassing Ezra, she was methodically tarnishing his reputation within the community. Enter Jake Morrison, a property lawyer who had been raised on a ranch 40 miles to the south before law school transformed him into a city attorney in a suit. His office carried the scent of fresh coffee and old leather-bound legal texts. As Sage detailed their predicament, his expression shifted from professional curiosity to personal indignation. "This is more than just harassment," Morrison declared, leaning back in his chair. "This is a conspiracy to interfere with business operations, and Possibly fraud if she is misrepresenting future property development to sell homes. But here's the issue. Harassment lawsuits take a minimum of 18 months and require a $15,000 retainer upfront. That's money most people don't have readily available. That was money Ezra did not possess. Not since Martha's medical expenses had drained their savings 3 years prior, but Morrison proposed a different tactic, one that capitalized on Ezra's strengths rather than his financial situation. In Texas, obstructing access to private property for over 30 minutes is considered criminal trespass. Morrison clarified, taking out a legal manual as thick as a phone book. The key is to document them in the act with precision and to have law enforcement. Who will actually enforce the law? Ezra began to meticulously time Brenda's visits. Using an old railroad pocket watch that had kept perfect time through 40 years of managing freight schedules, he set up a trail camera, the type used by deer hunters, disguised as a fence post to record license plates, faces, and the exact length of each blockade. Sage digitized the evidence, launching a social media effort that started to gain traction beyond their local area. Her posts about an elderly rancher being bullied by individuals with fake authority were shared by rural property rights organizations throughout Texas. Suddenly, Ezra's ordeal was reaching people who had encountered similar harassment from developers and HOAs. The smell of an impending storm filled the evening air as dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Mrs. Olivia stopped by with more fresh tomatoes and another piece of folk wisdom that was startlingly astute. "That woman believes she is very clever," she remarked, gesturing towards the subdivision. "But clever people understand when to cease. Irrational people never do. She is irrational." Standing in his barn later that night, inspecting his tractor's hydraulic system and testing the power takeoff winch, Ezra ran his fingers along a 200-foot length of logging chain. The heavy-duty type used by railroads to pull derailed cars back onto the tracks. Each link weighed approximately 5 pounds, and the entire assembly was capable of moving nearly anything that stood in its way. Tomorrow, he mused, might be an opportune day to ensure all his equipment was in perfect working order. Week 3 marked the deployment of Brenda's ultimate weapon. Death by 1,000 government forms. She lodged complaints with the county health department, alleging that Ezra's cattle operation was in breach of sanitation regulations. She reported him to the EPA for possible groundwater contamination from livestock manure. She even contacted the state agriculture department regarding his supposed unlicensed cattle operations, aiming to set off costly inspections that could bankrupt him with bureaucratic fees alone. The machinery of government harassment sputtered to life with alarming speed. Monday brought a health inspector who spent 4 hours measuring the distances between the cattle pens and the property line, billing Ezra $200 in processing fees, despite his operation meeting every single requirement. Tuesday saw the arrival of an EPA compliance officer who sampled his well water, only to find it was purer than most municipal tap water. Another $200 charge for the privilege of demonstrating his innocence. Wednesday's agricultural inspector showed up during a thunderstorm, compelling Ezra to trudge through ankle-deep mud to prove that his cattle had adequate shelter, food, and veterinary attention. The inspector, a young woman just out of college, expressed her apologies for the clear harassment but stated she was legally obligated to investigate every complaint, regardless of its lack of merit. "Just between us, Mr. Hendress," she confided while completing paperwork in his kitchen, "someone is trying to bury you in paperwork. I've seen this tactic before. Developers use regulatory harassment to compel property sales. It's within the law, but it's a dirty business." The personal attacks escalated from property issues to character assassination. Brenda began circulating rumors that Ezra was too old to operate farm machinery safely, posting on the Nextdoor app about dangerous elderly drivers, and insinuating that his family should make responsible decisions regarding his abilities. She suggested he was suffering from dementia, was incapable of managing his finances, and represented a risk to the community's safety. The financial strain intensified like water building behind a failing dam. The combination of inspection fees, lost income from block deliveries, and the impact of cattle stress on milk production put Ezra in a serious financial predicament. He contemplated selling 2 of his breeding heifers, animals he had named Buttercup and Rosie and raised from calves, just to meet his expenses. The idea of selling them felt like a betrayal of old friends. Then, Deputy Martinez delivered a warning that sent a shiver down Ezra's spine. In a quiet conversation at the feed store, Martinez casually mentioned that Brenda had been inquiring about Ezra's military service records, his financial status, and the legal avenues for removing elderly individuals from property management roles. She's looking for leverage, Martinez said, his voice barely audible. Competency hearings, financial guardianship, that sort of thing. I can't prove it yet, but someone is advising her on how to contest an elderly landowner's legal capacity. The division within the community devolved into a neighborhood-wide conflict. Parents began choosing sides, weighing property values against rural heritage. Team Brenda contended that agricultural odors and tractor noise were detrimental to home prices. Team Ezra offered him quiet support but refrained from speaking out publicly, fearing they would become Brenda's next targets for HOA violations and regulatory complaints. It was then that Sage made another discovery that completely altered the playing field. While researching HOA management laws at the UT Law Library, she found that Brenda had never officially registered as an HOA management company with the state. Her formal enforcement activities had no legal basis whatsoever. She had been operating without the necessary credentials while charging for services she was not legally permitted to offer. "Grandpa, this is huge," Sage declared, laying out legal documents on the kitchen table. In Texas, HOA management companies are required to be licensed and bonded. Operating without a license while collecting fees is a Class B misdemeanor, punishable by up to 180 days in jail and a $2,000 fine. Everything she has done is fraudulent. Instead of reacting with the emotion Brenda anticipated, Ezra began cultivating relationships within the community. He assisted Mrs. Olivia in mending her fence after a storm. He provided hay to a family in the subdivision whose ornamental horses needed feed during a dry spell. He lent his tractor to help clear fallen trees from the county road following a severe storm. Each act of neighborly support provided witnesses who saw the true Ezra, countering Brenda's portrayal of him as a dangerous and incompetent old man. These individuals started to question why someone so helpful and dependable would suddenly be depicted as a community menace. The chains made their discreet debut during this period. Ezra sourced 200 feet of logging chain from an associate at the railroad salvage yard. The industrial-grade type used for pulling 40-ton freight cars back onto the rails after a derailment. He kept them in his barn, telling inquisitive neighbors that he was merely updating some of his ranch equipment. The metallic scent of chain oil and the significant weight of each 5-pound link brought back memories of resolving problems with physics. Rather than politics, when a freight train goes off the tracks, you don't argue with it or submit paperwork. You attach chains and apply the correct leverage to reposition massive objects to their proper place. Standing in his barn during a late evening thunderstorm, the rain beating on the tin roof like machine gun fire, Ezra checked his old Ford tractor's power takeoff system and winch. Everything operated as smoothly as silk, prepared for any task that might arise. Tomorrow could bring another obstructed gate, another bout of harassment, another attempt to seize his family's heritage through bureaucratic warfare, but Ezra Hendris was finished with being on the defensive. The crucial discovery occurred on a blistering Tuesday afternoon, as Sage was sifting through county archives at the courthouse, where the air conditioning struggled to combat the oppressive Texas heat. She was bent over property tax records, acting on a hunch about Brenda's financial state, when she unearthed something that sent a chill down her spine. Brenda Kowalski was 3 months delinquent on her property taxes. Her home, the upscale suburban residence she claimed to be protecting the property values of, was on a path to tax foreclosure. But that was merely the start. Her HOA management company was in arrears for $12,000 in unpaid state fees and fines. Funds that should have been settled months ago for her to operate legally. "Grandpa, she isn't just power-crazed," Sage explained, arranging the documents on the kitchen table as if she were a detective piecing together a case. "She's in dire financial straits. Her real estate business has failed. Her truck payments are late. And look at this." She indicated a set of financial statements. "She's been using HOA funds to pay for her personal bills. That is embezzlement, pure and simple." The issue of water rights came to light through property development files Sage found buried deep within county planning documents. Brenda's harassment of Ezra was not random. She had been investigating the transfer of groundwater rights, exploring methods to compel property sales, and preparing a case to lay claim to his subterranean water supply. But the real game-changer was this. Brenda was secretly collaborating with Millennium Properties, a Dallas-based development firm specializing in converting rural land into shopping malls. They required Ezra's access to groundwater for their project to be feasible, and they were, offering Brenda a $5,000 finder's fee for each property she helped them secure. Sage found emails between Brenda and Millennium Properties outlining their rural acquisition strategy. A ruthless plan that involved regulatory harassment, financial coercion, and legal intimidation to pressure small landowners into selling their properties at a loss. In Texas, groundwater rights are owned by the surface property owners. Therefore, forcing Ezra from his land through methodical harassment could be construed as a conspiracy to commit theft if it could be proven in court. The counterfeit credential scheme came to light when Sage discovered Brenda's HOA enforcement officer certificates saved on her computer. The metadata revealed they had been created just last month using templates from Microsoft Word. She possessed no legal authority to issue fines, demand compliance, or take enforcement photographs. Every official-looking paper she had brandished was nothing more than worthless paper, supported only by intimidation. Deputy Martinez delivered the final piece of the puzzle during a private chat, revealing the extent of Brenda's desperation. She had been urging the sheriff's department to arrest Ezra for agricultural infractions, inquiring about civil forfeiture procedures, and looking into legal means to dispossess elderly landowners. She has asked me 3 times about competency hearings and financial guardianship. Martinez told Sage in a low voice. She wants to know if we can have your grandfather, declared mentally incompetent to manage his property. It's disgusting, but it's also proof of a conspiracy if we can link it to outside parties. The connection to the development company was traced through public records, which showed that Millennium Properties had used identical methods to target 8 other ranches and farms in the county. Each property was situated on valuable water rights or land prime for development. Each owner had endured similar campaigns of harassment involving fake officials, regulatory complaints, and financial pressure intended to force them to sell under duress. This was not a case of personal harassment. It was organized crime camouflaged as suburban community oversight. Brenda was not merely a power-obsessed HOA president. She was the local operative in a systematic effort to steal family land through legal maneuvering and bureaucratic warfare. Standing in his kitchen that evening, reviewing the evidence that confirmed his family was under siege by professional land thieves, Ezra understood that this struggle was about more than just his ranch. Every small landowner in Texas was vulnerable to the same threat from developers who wielded regulatory harassment as a tool against those who could not afford to fight back. But unlike their previous targets, they had chosen the wrong one. Ezra Hendress was not backing down, and he was about to teach Millennium Properties and their local enforcer that some old men have a bite far worse than their bark. Ezra's kitchen table was converted into a command center that would have impressed a railroad dispatcher. County maps were laid out on the aged wooden top, alongside property deeds, HOA papers, and Sage's neatly organized legal findings. The comforting aroma of brewing coffee mixed with the musty smell of old documents as 3 generations of ranching experience converged with contemporary legal tactics. The coalition formed rapidly as other targeted landowners realized they were not isolated in their fight. Linda Martinez, a horse trainer, found that the harassment she endured perfectly mirrored Ezra's timeline. Robert Big Jim Thompson, a hay farmer, conceded that he had been receiving the same fraudulent citations from Brenda's associates, 2 retirees on small homesteads, the elderly Kowalski couple, ironically sharing Brenda's surname, and Vietnam veteran Tom Rodriguez, with his modest cattle operation, all recounted similar experiences of orchestrated harassment. Jake Morrison's law office transformed into the headquarters for their counteroffensive. The lawyer arranged their evidence on his conference table like a general mapping out D-Day, outlining their multifaceted approach. Criminal proceedings against Brenda for fraud and impersonation, a civil conspiracy lawsuit against Millennium Properties, a counter-harassment injunction to halt the blockades, and public disclosure to protect future potential victims. This is what's known as a color of law violation, Morrison stated, his finger tracing a line through federal legal codes. When an individual falsely claims to have official authority they do not hold, it becomes a federal civil rights offense, carrying a penalty of up to 10 years in prison. Brenda's fake badge and bogus citations have just earned her a one-way trip to serious federal time. Sage established a secure digital folder where all 6 landowners could upload photos, videos, and records of harassment events. The collection of evidence swelled to over 200 documented infractions across all properties. revealing a distinct pattern of coordinated criminal behavior that had unfolded over months of systematic intimidation. Deputy Martinez became an inside source, revealing that his own grandfather had lost his farm to similar schemes in the 1990s. Developers have been pulling this con for decades, he confessed in private, but no one has ever gathered enough proof to establish a conspiracy. You all might be the ones to finally take them down. Martinez committed to scheduling his patrols to catch Brenda's team in the act, while also providing official incident reports that would be admissible in court. He further explained that Texas law allows property owners to request citizens' arrest authority for repeated trespassing, enabling them to hold offenders until the police arrive. But this requires proper training and impeccable documentation. The media plan took shape when Sage got in touch with Emma Rodriguez, an investigative journalist for the county newspaper who had been following developer corruption across 3 Texas counties. Rodriguez eagerly took on the story, as it connected to a larger trend of rural land expropriation she had been looking into for months. "This is exactly the break I've been searching for," Rodriguez told them during a meeting at the ranch. "Millennium Properties consistently appears in property conflicts, but there has never been enough evidence to prove an organized conspiracy. Your documentation could blow this whole thing wide open." Community mobilization gained momentum when Ezra threw a barbecue at his ranch, inviting residents from the subdivision who had supported him in private but were hesitant to speak out. 23 families attended, and the discussions revealed that most residents despised Brenda's methods but were afraid of being her next targets for harassment. "We came here for some peace and quiet," confessed Sarah Patterson, a nurse living 3 doors down from Brenda. "Instead, we got a neighborhood tyrant who threatens anyone that challenges her. Your standing up to her has empowered the rest of us to do the same." The technical strategy was born from Ezra's railroad background. Rather than attempting to shift an unmovable object, you alter the ground beneath it. He began to devise property alterations that would make it physically impossible to block his entrance while staying entirely within the law. Property owners are permitted to install cattle guards, metal grids that prevent livestock from wandering, on their private driveways without a permit, provided they do not obstruct public roads. While vehicles can traverse them, parking on them is uncomfortable and risks damage to tires and suspension. However, Ezra's chain strategy was the true masterstroke. By employing logging chains and his tractor's winch, he could legally tow trespassing vehicles away from his property line, a method identical to the one used by railroads to clear obstructions from their tracks. The goal was not to cause damage to the property, but to apply the necessary force to move obstacles back to where they belonged. Morrison confirmed that every aspect of their plan was perfectly legal. Brenda had no entitlement to park on private land. Property owners are allowed to remove trespassing vehicles, and the use of minimal force required to clear access is protected by Texas property law. The timing of their plan was aimed for maximum effect at the upcoming HOA meeting, where Brenda intended to publicly assert her authority before an audience of 60 subdivision residents. This would ensure the maximum number of witnesses, the greatest possible embarrassment, and the fullest exposure of her fraudulent activities. The preparation of equipment became an almost ceremonial process. Ezra serviced his 1985 Ford tractor, checked the power takeoff winch, and rehearsed attaching the logging chains. Sage filmed the entire procedure for documentation, demonstrating that all operations were conducted safely and with professional care. Standing in his barn on the eve of their counterattack, surrounded by the tools and chains that had helped build American infrastructure, Ezra contemplated his father's words. "Sometimes you make a stand not because you are certain to win, but because it is the right thing to do. But if you are going to make a stand, you had better be smart about it." Tomorrow, Brenda Kowalski would discover what transpires when fabricated authority confronts genuine power. Brenda, driven by desperation and sensing her scheme was collapsing, opted for a drastic measure. On a blistering Monday morning, she filed for a restraining order against Ezra, alleging that he had threatened her with heavy machinery and posed a significant risk to the suburban community. The legal documents portrayed him as an unstable elderly man whose unpredictable use of farm equipment was an immediate danger to the neighborhood's safety. The fraudulent emergency call was placed at 6:30 a.m. Startling Ezra awake with its sheer nerve, Brenda dialed 911, reporting that Ezra was operating his tractor erratically near the property line and suggesting he might intentionally ram her vehicle or injure innocent people. She was betting that first responders would detain him first and investigate later, paving the way for a psychiatric assessment that could lead to the loss of his property rights. Her attempt to manipulate the media was aimed at a Dallas TV station, where she presented herself as a courageous suburban mother safeguarding families from an unstable rural neighbor who flouted basic community rules. The reporter, eager for a story of conflict, initially accepted her narrative of agricultural dangers threatening suburban tranquility. However, the restraining order hearing marked Brenda's first significant legal setback. She appeared with manipulated photos that showed Ezra's tractor positioned threateningly close to her truck, along with written testimonies from paid supporters who claimed to have observed his menacing behavior. But Jake Morrison was prepared, presenting video evidence of Brenda's systematic harassment, trespassing, and coordinated blockades. Judge Patricia Wells, a no-nonsense former prosecutor, examined the evidence with increasing annoyance. "Miss Kowalski," she stated curtly, "this appears to be a property dispute in which you are the aggressor, not the victim. Your request for a restraining order is denied, and I am cautioning you against filing baseless claims that waste this court's resources." Thwarted by her legal failure and feeling the pressure of time, Brenda resorted to physical intimidation. She enlisted two men from her ex-husband's construction firm, burly individuals named Rick and Danny, who dressed in hard hats and safety vests to appear official. Their large work trucks, along with Brenda's F-250, formed a solid blockade, turning Ezra's entrance into an impassable barrier of steel and diesel smoke. The situation escalated to a physical confrontation when Ezra approached to request they move so he could attend to a sick calf. Rick, a former high school football player who had gone to seed, stepped forward menacingly. "You need to stay back, old man," he snarled, shoving Ezra backward with enough force to make him lose his balance. "This is official HOA business, and you're getting in the way." But Rick had made a critical error. Sage had recorded the entire incident on video from her vantage point across the county road. The assault provided grounds for criminal charges and demonstrated that Brenda's campaign of harassment had escalated to violence against a 73-year-old man attempting to care for his animals. The use of fear tactics within the community intensified as Brenda circulated rumors on Nextdoor and Facebook, claiming that Ezra's cattle were carriers of diseases that could endanger neighborhood children. She posted fabricated health alerts about groundwater contamination, livestock parasites, and airborne pathogens supposedly originating from the ranch and spreading to nearby homes. This manufactured panic was effective on some of the newer residents, who lacked the agricultural knowledge to recognize the falsehoods. The financial assault became predatory when Brenda lodged complaints with the IRS, alleging that Ezra was not paying the correct agricultural taxes on his cattle operation. She also reported him to the state agriculture department for running an unlicensed livestock business, aiming to trigger costly compliance inspections that could bankrupt him with bureaucratic fees alone. Deputy Martinez's investigation uncovered the crucial evidence that proved Brenda's scheme had corporate support. Millennium Properties had already filed preliminary development plans for a shopping center that included Ezra's land. Despite not yet owning it, the harassment campaign had a clear financial motivation, which was documented in official county records. "She's not just some unhinged HOA lady," Martinez explained privately to Sage. "She's the local face of an organized land appropriation. These developers have a history of this, and they will continue until someone puts a stop to them." Sage's social media research revealed Brenda's past activities in Ohio, where she had employed identical methods against 3 other rural landowners. One elderly farmer lost his property to tax foreclosure following costly harassment campaigns. Another sold his land at a significant loss just to escape the ordeal. A third is still engaged in a legal battle in federal court, his life savings depleted by legal expenses. The pattern of evidence showed that Millennium Properties operated with a consistent strategy. Identify vulnerable rural properties near areas of development, install agents in local HOAs or community groups, use regulatory harassment to create financial strain, make lowball offers to desperate owners, and then resell the land to commercial developers for substantial profits. Jake Morrison's compilation of evidence now included documentation proving conspiracy, fraud, impersonation of officials, assault, harassment, and a pattern of organized crime across state lines. What had begun as a property dispute had evolved into a federal racketeering case involving victims in multiple states. Standing in his barn that evening, loading 200 feet of railroad chain onto his truck. Ezra considered that the next day would bring either a resolution or an escalation beyond anyone's prediction. But after weeks of being bullied, he was prepared to push back with the kind of force that can move freight trains. The metallic sound of the chain links settling in the truck bed was like the sound of justice getting ready to roll. The day of reckoning dawned with the familiar intensity of Texas heat. The sun already oppressive at 6 a.m., as Brenda parked her F-250 across Ezra's gate with a flourish. But this day was different. She had come prepared with camping chairs, a cooler packed with ice, and enough provisions for a full day's siege. Her strategy was to hold the property line until dusk, then stride into the HOA meeting as the undisputed sovereign of suburban order. Sage took her position across the county road with her video camera, recording the scene from several perspectives, while Deputy Martinez situated his patrol car nearby. His official reason for being there was to respond to a property dispute, but his actual purpose was to ensure that the events to follow remained within legal limits. The moment of engineering brilliance came when Ezra reversed his 1985 Ford tractor from the barn, its diesel engine emitting a low, controlled rumble. 40 years of repositioning derailed freight cars had taught him that the correct application of leverage could move any object. Today, he was applying those principles to a suburban challenge. The 200 feet of railroad chain rattled in his truck bed as he maneuvered everything into place with mathematical exactness. Brenda sat in her air-conditioned cab, windows closed, furiously texting about her impending presentation to the HOA board. She was so engrossed in portraying Ezra as a menacing old man with heavy machinery that she failed to see the chain being expertly looped through her rear trailer hitch and attached to his tractor's power takeoff winch. The moment of truth was a clear demonstration of physics triumphing over suburban conceit. As Ezra activated his winch, Brenda's truck began to slide sideways, away from the gate, despite her frantic efforts to brake or shift into park. The tractor's 15,000 pounds of mass and mechanical superiority effortlessly overcame her vehicle's resistance, pulling her F-250 across the gravel as if it were a child's toy being tugged by a resolute parent. Her oversized tires screeched and smoked against the road, leaving black rubber marks that permanently etched her defeat. The sound was a symphony of metal grinding on asphalt, diesel engines clashing in a mechanical debate, and Brenda's muffled screams from within her cab as physics delivered a lesson in genuine authority. The creekside destination was a testament to Ezra's masterful plan. He did not pull her truck into the water. That would constitute property damage and provide her with legal recourse. Instead, he positioned it on the muddy bank, where it sank axle-deep into the soft creek bed, completely stuck but mechanically unharmed. It was a move of maximum humiliation with minimal legal risk. Brenda burst out of her truck like a character from a cartoon, yelling about property damage and theft as mud oozed around her expensive boots. However, Deputy Martinez calmly informed her that moving a trespassing vehicle from private property was entirely within the law, and since there was no mechanical damage, the truck was merely temporarily immobilized in the natural landscape. No crime had been committed. A crowd began to form as news of the event spread through the subdivision with the speed of a wildfire. By noon, 40 residents had assembled to watch the unfolding drama. Some were laughing and filming with their phones. Others were calling tow trucks to assist in freeing Brenda's vehicle. And a few were already drafting their own declarations of independence from HOA overreach. Emma Rodriguez and a photographer arrived just as Brenda was attempting to wade through knee-deep mud to inspect her truck. The image of an elderly rancher outmaneuvering a fraudulent official with straightforward mechanical skill was ideal for Rodriguez's ongoing report on developer harassment tactics. The photos were destined for tomorrow's front page. Brenda's desperation peaked when she called 911, claiming her truck had been stolen. However, the dispatcher could hear Deputy Martinez in the background, clarifying that he had witnessed the entire lawful removal of a trespassing vehicle. No crime had taken place, only the long overdue consequences of criminal actions. The truth spread like summer lightning after Sage uploaded the video online with the title, "Fake HOA Cop Gets a Lesson in Property Rights from a 73-year-old Grandfather." Within hours, the video had garnered 50,000 views and hundreds of supportive comments from rural landowners who shared similar tales of developer harassment. This community revelation instantly reshaped the neighborhood's social landscape. Several residents of the subdivision approached Ezra to apologize, confessing they had known Brenda's methods were wrong but had been too fearful to object. Mrs. Olivia arrived with fresh lemonade and announced, loud enough for all to hear, The loud duck has finally been shot. American justice is very good. Brenda's supporters abandoned her as quickly as rats leaving a sinking ship. Rick and Danny, the construction workers who had assisted in blocking the gate and had assaulted Ezra, suddenly recalled urgent business elsewhere, facing potential criminal charges for assault and conspiracy. They were now keen to cooperate with the authorities and testify against their former boss. The legal net closed with perfect timing when Jake Morrison appeared with sheriff's deputies, armed with arrest warrants backed by months of documented evidence. Brenda was arrested for impersonating a public official, fraud, conspiracy, and harassment, all while standing knee-deep in creek mud. Her authority is baseless as her credentials. The arrest led to search warrants for Brenda's files, which exposed the entire Millennium Properties operation through emails, financial records, and strategic plans. Federal authorities were alerted to the patterns of interstate fraud, and the development company's complicity became undeniable proof of organized crime. As Brenda's truck was being towed from the creek at her own expense, the power structure of the neighborhood was completely upended. Residents who had been intimidated by her feigned authority now felt emboldened to speak out about financial discrepancies, biased enforcement, and the abusive practices they had silently endured for months. Standing beside his tractor, the chains neatly coiled in his truck bed, Ezra watched as justice advanced like a freight train that could not be stopped. The Willowbrook Community Center was alive with an energy that had nothing to do with the air conditioner fighting a losing battle against the August heat. What was intended to be Brenda's moment of glory, her grand speech on safeguarding property values from agricultural dangers, had morphed into her public downfall. 80 residents filled the room, joined by media, law enforcement, and allies from other affected properties, leaving standing room only for the trial of the year. Ezra's arrival was met with a spontaneous round of applause from nearly half the attendees, a sound that echoed off the cheap paneled walls like a clap of thunder. The 73-year-old rancher entered, clad in his finest boots and a crisp shirt, holding a folder of papers and exuding the quiet assurance of a man who had already secured victory. Following him, Sage radiated pride, while Mrs. Olivia clapped with vigor from her seat in the front row. Margaret Torres, the association's vice president and a retired elementary school teacher, assumed control of the meeting with the practiced authority of someone accustomed to managing unruly children for 3 decades. With Brenda in custody and the board in disarray, Margaret promptly offered an apology to Ezra on behalf of the entire association and demanded a thorough investigation into financial misconduct that extended far beyond mere harassment. "Before we proceed tonight," Margaret declared, her voice resonating clearly throughout the crowded room, "I wish to publicly apologize to Mr. Hendricks for the harassment he has suffered. What occurred here was unjust, illegal, and utterly at odds with the principles this community ought to embody." The session of public confessions followed, releasing months of pent-up anger and apprehension. One by one, residents of the subdivision rose to recount their encounters with Brenda's tyrannical methods. Stories emerged of biased enforcement aimed at single mothers, financial anomalies in community enhancement projects, and personal grievances disguised as HOA infractions. Sarah Patterson, the nurse residing 3 houses away from Brenda, stood with trembling hands to speak to the assembly. "She threatened to fine me $500 because my mailbox was 2 inches too high," she recounted, her voice gaining strength with every word. "When I challenged the measurement, she told me I could either pay the fine or face legal proceedings. I paid because I was intimidated. But I should have stood up to her like Mr. Hendricks did." Margaret's financial disclosure landed like a bombshell in the stuffy room. The HOA's records revealed $23,000 in unaccounted expenses and missing funds. Money that was meant for community improvements but had seemingly been diverted to Brenda's personal bank accounts and used to pay her accomplices. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret announced, her teacher's voice cutting through the rising murmurs of indignation, "we have been swindled, not just out of our money, but out of our sense of community and mutual respect. This stops tonight." Jake Morrison stepped up to the podium with the calm assurance of a prosecutor making his final statement. He methodically detailed the entire conspiracy, his voice carrying across the hushed room like a sermon on justice. This was never about community standards or property values. Morrison clarified, gesturing to charts that illustrated Millennium Properties' development schedule. This was a coordinated effort to seize Mr. Hendricks's land through systematic harassment and fraud. The same Methods have been employed against landowners in 3 other states, consistently targeting elderly or financially precarious individuals. Deputy Martinez then provided the law enforcement viewpoint with military-like precision, detailing how Brenda's counterfeit credentials, fraudulent reports, and collaboration with paid associates amounted to multiple felonies under both Texas and federal law. His badge and uniform added official authority to what many residents had previously written off as a mere neighborhood tiff. What we are addressing here, Martinez stated with conviction, is organized crime posing as suburban community. Oversight Ms. Kowalski is facing up to 15 years in federal prison, and her co-conspirators are being apprehended in several states as we speak. Then came the defining moment of the evening. Ezra approached the podium with the slow, deliberate gait of a man who has managed freight train timetables for 40 years and understands the importance of perfect timing. The room fell into complete silence as he adjusted the microphone and surveyed the faces before him. A mix of supporters and former adversaries. "Folks," he began, his seasoned voice imbued with the authority of 3 generations on the same piece of land. "I didn't pull that truck into the creek because I was angry, although I was plenty angry. I did it because sometimes the only way to handle a bully is to prove to them they've chosen the wrong person to mess with. But this isn't about getting even, it's about ensuring this never happens to anyone else." The room burst into a prolonged applause that overpowered the struggling air conditioner and caused the windows to vibrate. Emma Rodriguez documented the scene for the next day's front page. But the true effect came from residents who were live-streaming the meeting on social media, carrying the story to rural communities all over Texas. Margaret proposed a motion that was passed by a landslide to dismiss the current HOA management company, reimburse all unlawfully collected fees, enact new bylaws to safeguard agricultural properties, and implement transparent financial oversight to prevent any future corruption. Mrs. Olivia's unexpected gift of a handcrafted quilt, embroidered with the signatures of all the subdivision families and the message, "Thank you for standing up for all of us," brought the tough old rancher to tears and prompted the entire room to rise in a standing ovation that lasted a full 5 minutes. Justice had been delivered, and it had the taste of triumph. 3 months later, the Willowbrook subdivision had been transformed from a community fractured by fear into a neighborhood united by hard-earned wisdom. The new HOA leadership collaborates closely with Ezra, even arranging volunteer groups to help repair the fence damage from Brenda's harassment campaign. What began as a conflict between suburban and rural life has blossomed into something better. Mutual respect between people who have chosen different lifestyles on the same land. The legal outcome was a model of precise justice. Brenda Kowalski pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges and was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Along with an order for full restitution to all her victims, Millennium Properties was hit with $2.3 million in fines, had their Texas business license revoked, and was permanently barred from operating in the state. The development scheme was completely dismantled, shielding dozens of rural properties from similar harassment in the future. The healing of the community took place in ways both practical and profound. Residents of the subdivision collected $15,000 to help Ezra replace the calf that was lost during Brenda's blockade of the veterinarian. More significantly, they began volunteering for ranch upkeep, forging genuine bonds between suburban families and their agricultural neighbor. Children who had once been wary of the scary ranch now pleaded with their parents for weekend trips to learn about cattle and horses. Sage's legal career was launched with a clear sense of purpose and drive. She graduated ahead of schedule from UT Law School and, with Jake Morrison, founded the Texas Rural Property Defense Fund, offering free legal aid to families targeted by developer harassment. They have already assisted 12 families in combating similar schemes, achieving a perfect record of success and turning Ezra's triumph into a blueprint for protecting rural property rights. The scholarship program turned a tragedy into a source of opportunity. With the restitution funds from Brenda and Millennium Properties, Ezra created the Thunder Creek Agricultural Scholarship for rural students studying farming, ranching, or agricultural law. The inaugural recipient was Maria Santos, whose family's small dairy farm had faced identical pressure from developers in a neighboring county before Ezra's case brought the scheme to light. Conservation initiatives have ensured the permanent safeguarding of the land where it all began. Ezra joined forces with the Texas Land Conservancy to place his ranch under an agricultural easement, which guarantees it can never be developed for commercial use. 3 other targeted families emulated his example, preserving 200 acres of rural heritage from future development threats. The annual gathering has evolved from a simple neighborhood barbecue into a regional event celebrating agricultural heritage and cooperation between rural and suburban communities. The first Thunder Creek Heritage Festival attracted families from 5 counties for educational workshops, local cuisine, and community-building activities that helped to close the divide between country and suburban living. The media's influence extended far beyond the county's borders. Emma Rodriguez's investigative journalism series earned a state award and led to legislative hearings on developer harassment methods. Her work was instrumental in the passing of the Property Owner Protection Act, which makes it a felony to impersonate officials in real estate schemes, thereby protecting vulnerable property owners throughout Texas. Deputy Martinez's advancement to a detective role, specializing in rural property crimes, demonstrated that integrity and doing the right thing can advance one's career. He attributed the case with teaching him that effective law enforcement is about understanding community dynamics, not just applying rules without considering the context. The legacy of technical knowledge has continued in unforeseen ways. Ezra's application of railroad engineering principles to solve the truck issue has become a case study in agricultural engineering courses, teaching students that the most straightforward mechanical solutions are often the most effective for complex social challenges. A cross-cultural friendship has bloomed, with Mrs. Olivia becoming Ezra's closest neighbor and confidant. She assists with his ranch paperwork, while he teaches her granddaughter to ride horses. Their friendship is a symbol of the community's shift from mistrust to genuine empathy across generational and cultural divides. Financial recovery has enabled the ranch to flourish beyond its previous constraints, with the harassment over and legal expenses covered by restitution. Ezra has increased his herd to 45 cattle and initiated a small agritourism venture, where children from the subdivision can learn about farming during educational weekend visits. Personal healing has been found through helping others, just as Martha would have wished. Ezra keeps her picture on his kitchen table, next to the folder of legal papers that saved his ranch, serving as a daily reminder that love and justice often demand the same level of fierce dedication. The larger impact is evident in the lasting changes seen across rural Texas. What began with one elderly rancher defending his land has become a driving force for statewide reforms in HOA governance, developer accountability, and the protection of rural properties, sparking similar resistance movements in other states dealing with agricultural displacement. And that is the story of how a 73-year-old railroad engineer, armed with a tractor and some chains, dismantled a multi-million-dollar fraudulent operation and preserved his family's heritage. Please leave a comment below. Have you ever been confronted by a fraudulent authority figure attempting to take what is rightfully yours? If this story has motivated you to stand up for what is right, be sure to hit that subscribe button, because next week, I'll be sharing the tale of a small-town librarian who challenged the IRS and won, using only her resolve and a century-old legal loophole they had overlooked. Another day, another HOA conflict resolved. If this story made you shake your head in disbelief or pump your fist in triumph, hit that like button, share your own HOA story in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss another battle in the burbs.